Welcome to the Rivals Rankings podcast. I'm Rankings Director Adam Friedman, and I'm here with National Recruiting Analyst Marshall Levenson. Marshall, the 2025 rankings were just updated this week, and there were a bunch of big moves in the Mid-South region. That's Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, all of those states. There are two new five stars in the state of Texas. Let's start with the first one. The biggest move up out of the five stars is quarterback Keelan Russell out of Duncanville, Texas. The Alabama commit moves up to number 9 in the country, 38 spots. He jumped up there. What did you see from Keelan during the summer here that really helped push him up the rankings?
Yeah, well, he's been a continual riser since he, came off his second straight, state championship here in Texas in the toughest division, which spoke a lot about his talents. Obviously, had a great year. But the 7-on-7 scene was near perfect for him, and then obviously what rose him up into the top 50. And then the biggest things to his resume that he added was the Elite 11 Finals MVP, and then obviously came to the Rivals 5-star and won the quarterback challenge. So obviously both of those coming against the cream of the crop when it comes to those quarterback talents. Among other 5-stars, he kept rising to the top and showed that he had that ability. And pretty much everything he showed up to this offseason, he has dominated and won. Most of those things. And obviously now he's committed to Alabama. So, he's going to have a bunch of weapons around him there. And he certainly fits the mold of what a 5-star quarterback looks like at this point in his development.
Yeah, I really love what he brings to the table. Did a whole breakdown on him on Rivals this week as one of the bigger mover uppers, and I talked about him and in as the new one of the new 5-stars. We've written a lot about this guy, but he's an athletic specimen at quarterback, an athlete, really good competition he's played against.
Yeah.
He's experienced with really good playmakers around him. I love what he's able to do, throwing the ball down the field, finding open receivers on underneath routes, and he's better reading coverages than people would expect. His footwork is a lot better than I expected when I saw him in Jacksonville for Rivals 5-star. I was really blown away by just how much better his footwork was in person than what I saw on film and even from clips earlier this offseason. I think the best is ahead for him for sure. And he's my sleeper as a potential number 1 in the Rivals 250 later on this cycle. Just
absolutely. And just another quick note before we move on. The running aspect is something we haven't necessarily seen at a level that I think we're going to this year. Duncanville had, one of the best running backs in the country last year that took most of those rushing yards. Although, Russell was efficient with his legs. I think that's going to be a massive part of his game that we're going to see added to him, along with, an already, accurate passer that he is with plenty of touchdowns and yards coming through the air.
Yeah, mechanically, he's fine there. He's got a really dynamic throwing motion. He's able to throw from multiple planes. Arm strength, yes. He's able to put touch on the passes, absolutely. Can throw into tight windows for sure, but he can also buy time. And he's a throw first quarterback, not a run first guy. Yeah, so really like what he brings to the table there, and certainly going into a great system at Alabama. And he could be just like Michael Penix there, just a righty instead of a lefty. So another new 5-star though in the state of Texas, number 1 linebacker in the country now, Riley Pettijohn, number 14 in the Rivals 250, up 19 spots. Ohio State linebacker commit, one of the very fastest linebackers in the entire country, has a really bright future ahead of him at Ohio State. Marshall, what's your take on Pettijohn and his abilities, and really just why do we project him as a potential first-round pick?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is looking at linebackers and where they fit into projecting to the NFL, especially among those first rounders, because now there's not that many of them that you're going to see, especially those off-ball linebackers going in the first round. But if there is a mold that does, it is Riley Pettijohn. And a big reason for that, obviously, he was trained as a safety growing up. He originally started as a safety coming into high school, so he was trained in coverage, and he has the ball skills and the athleticism. And now he just happens to weigh over 200 pounds, and he's going to end up at 220, 225 pounds here in the very near future. And he's probably going to run, I think he runs a 10-7 in the 100. So he's going to be, in the combine, I'm sure he's going to be one of those guys that pops on a spreadsheet somewhere with, as far as that linebacker speed. So, but he's really patient in terms of diagnosing, but he does it quickly. Can play in the back end. He can go get the ball. He can, blitz when he needs to in certain packages. And if you really asked him to, he could probably come off the edge, in a in a pretty efficient manner. So he fits all three levels of the defense well, no matter where you put him. And if you ask him to play safety or outside linebacker, he could probably do it, depending on, who's in front of him. So those are the types of off-ball linebackers that are getting taken in the first round. And he's certainly, proved at Rivals 5-star that he can play, in coverage against guys that generally linebackers have had trouble with. So those were the biggest things. And obviously he's extremely productive, 125 tackles last year, again, in some of the toughest divisions in Texas. So not only does he have the measurables and the intangibles, but he's proven that he can do it, time and time again, game in and game out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the speed really stands out there. Like you said, 10 700-meter dash,
Right.
great size, 6'2", what was it? A 7'1" 3-cone, which is outstanding. I think there's
Yeah.
only been 11 linebackers taken in the first 3 rounds since 2018 who have run that fast a 3-cone time. And at that size, 2 of them, Micah Parsons and Jack
Yeah.
Campbell,
Yeah, the
really.
explosiveness too. I think he jumped like 35 inches in the vertical or somewhere in that ballpark, which is, freaky for a guy that looks like he does.
Right, like, physical, can
Yep.
play downhill, play between the tackles, shoots those running lanes. He can get into the backfield as a blitzer. He can
Yeah,
cover sideline to sideline, and certainly really good in coverage, like we saw at Rivals 5-star. He pulled in an interception during 7-on-7 there. So sky high ceiling for
absolutely.
Riley Pettit-John. We've got 2 other guys from your region who are just outside 5-star range and
Mhm.
did move up a good bit. The first one I want to start with is Amarian Robinson. He's up to number 34 in the Rivals for 250, one of the biggest risers of this update. 87 spots he jumped up there. What did you see from Robinson that really helped us move him up the rankings?
Yeah, I mean, everyone saw it. It was an immediate discussion coming out of 5-star. It was like he has to move up, and he's been well into the rankings. He was hovering around 100 for a while, and actually had a couple dips. And that was one of our questions going in. It's like, is he, because we hadn't seen him a ton in person in the last year or so, and he absolutely proved that he needed to go back up and even higher than he had ever been. Certainly, obviously, looks fantastic. Just from a frame standpoint. But one of the top overall playmaking safeties that we saw there, and he maybe had one of the best performances of anybody at Rivals 5-star. Consistently knocking down passes. He's not holding. He's in phase. Exactly what you wanted to see. He was playing clean, but he was dominating the talent. So, I'm going to get to see him this season, on the field. So that'll be a really good matchup. They're playing some pretty good competition early in the season that I'll get to see him match up with, with some legitimate receivers and such. So we'll see him again here pretty soon. But yeah, it was a pretty easy choice for us to move him up, and obviously he's at number 34 now. So if he continues to display that level, he's absolutely going to be in discussion, to move up into that 5-star status. But certainly showed that he was one of the top safeties in the country.
Yeah, not a guy who jumps off the page when it comes to just traits overall. He's
Right.
5'11", 6 foot. He's not overly long. He's got a 6'2" wingspan,
Mm.
31-inch arms, which is pretty good for that size, but
Yeah.
not overly impressive there, right? But from a skill set perspective, he was blowing us away, right? At 5-star, he's really sticky, like you mentioned. He's in phase with these receivers. He was playing cornerback, even though he's more likely going to be a safety at
Right.
the college level. He's a physical guy, but not overly physical. He made a lot of plays on the ball, and just forced a lot of bad passes because he was in position all the time. Really impressive summer for Amarian Robinson. I also want to talk about Khalil Lockett, the new Texas receiver commit. He's up to number 48 in the Rivals 250, up 17 spots. Really gifted prospect, right? What have you seen from Khalil Lockett over the last few months that helps him continue to rise up the rankings?
Yeah, the measurables are the big thing, and the projectability. He has what I guess you would consider his breakout season at Saxy, 1,200, maybe even 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns, and he's full of the highlight reel plays. But 10 1/4 inch hands. I think he's got 33-inch arms. So those are the numbers that when you look at which receivers are going to pop, to the NFL evaluators and to any evaluator really, those numbers stand out. So that alone has propelled him up. Obviously, this season will be very big for him to see if he can follow up. That first extremely productive season. We haven't seen him on the national stage maybe as much as we've liked to at this point. But again, with those traits that he possesses and his ability, body control in the air and everything like that, it does lend itself to project him very well. Obviously, just committed to Texas, we know what their offense can be. He's going to have quarterbacks delivering him the ball, and there's going to be a lot of weapons that is going to surround him to let him be in situations where he's not necessarily going up against, being bracketed as often as, guys with that level of athleticism normally are. So this season will be really big for him. He's another one that I'm going to try to get to early in the year because he certainly is a player that with those traits that he has, could potentially be one of the top receivers in the class.
Yeah, really like what he has on film for sure. A highlight reel kind of guy. You mentioned 10 and a quarter inch hands, 33-inch arms, 33 and a half inch arms
Yeah,
with a what is that, a 6'6" wingspan, 6'7" wingspan at just over 6'1", maybe 6'2",
right.
touching that close. But really good route runner. Like what he does there. He's got really good short area quickness. He's quick off of his plant foot, has those long arms to give quarterbacks big targets to throw into. Just really like what he brings to the table. I think the future is really bright for Lockett, not just this season, but in
Mhm.
Austin and then potentially beyond that. Really looking forward to seeing what he's able to do for his senior season. We've got a few other guys in the Mid South who made some waves in their new Rivals 250. New entrants into the Rivals 250. Jasper Parker, JT Lindsay, Chad Woodfork returns to the Rivals 250, and Smith Arakbo also enters the Rivals 250. Quickly, Marshall, of these four guys, what really stands out to you just among the running backs and then certainly the two defensive players?
Yeah, the running backs, those are two guys that have big off seasons. They came into this off season with not a ton of attention, but obviously picked up quite a few offers. Both of them committed. Lindsey going to LSU, Parker going to Michigan. Those Louisiana running backs are always good. Obviously, you have Harlem Berry, in the state, James Simon. So there's a bunch of these top running backs coming from the state. Jasper Parker really surprised me at Rivals 5-star with especially his ability to catch the ball. His route running was much better than I thought it was going to be. He was a little bit taller than I thought he was going to be. So that was impressive just to see what he was able to do, kind of that second element of his game, which the modern running back has to have, right? And then JT Lindsay, I have not seen a ton of him in person. That'll be another one that I'm going to get to this season, but he's had a big offseason. Showed off the speed, obviously, like I said, committed to LSU now. So that they're going to, with the playmakers there, they're going to put him in situations where he's really able to excel. And he's been a riser. Both those Louisiana guys have. And I think they're going to continue to kind of show off why they did that. I don't think we're going to be wrong about either of those guys. And then the edge rushers, Chad Woodfork, a little bit of on the lighter side of some of those defensive ends, but extremely athletic. Is going to jump really well. He's going to fire off the ball. This senior season will be really big for him. Had a really good Houston Under Armour camp, purely just using that athleticism. Didn't even really have to show off much of the many moves. He was able to blow by guys just using that speed and that burst, which lends itself to to being, once he does add on that weight in the future, if he's able to kind of combining those things. And then Smith Arogbo is another guy. I think he has a chance to really rise up after this season as well. He's one that has the size and the burst. I really like his pass rush arsenal, and he's a guy that's going to rack up the stats. So both of those guys, I think he's 6'5" already, so he's got the length. I think both of those guys have a chance to really prove something with their senior seasons. But this season is going to be big for a lot of these guys to maybe even prove they're new entrants, but maybe even prove that they belong higher than we have them slotted.
Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on all of these players throughout their senior season and certainly into All-Star season as well.
Absolutely.
Marshall, thank you so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure you guys catch all of Marshall's content on rivals.com and, of course, give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks a lot, Marshall.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by national recruiting analyst Greg Smith to discuss the big moves in the Midwest this rankings update. And there was no bigger move than Tavian St. Clair moving up to number one in the Rivals 250. Greg, you are awfully familiar with Tavian St. Clair, his family. You've been in touch with them for a very long time. The Ohio State quarterback commit had an outstanding offseason. And what did you see from him that really made the case really strong for you to push him up to number one?
Yeah, I think the thing with Tavian, there's multiple things, but one of them him is that every time we saw him, it felt like he was getting better, which is something that I think is going to continue, which is unique for a guy who's now been moved to the number one spot in the country. But he's kind of got all the tools I think necessary to be a big time quarterback, and he's going into a great system and situation at Ohio State. He is 6'4", 220 plus pounds. He moves well. He's got good arm strength. He has good accuracy and touch, and he throws the ball well on the run. And oh, by the way, I think that he's got good leadership qualities as well. Like he is a very unique blend of all of those things. And I don't know that any of those traits necessarily like jump off the charts to you and say, okay, that's, he's got a bigger arm than Bryce Underwood, or he's more accurate than Julian Lewis, but he's just like right there with everyone. And you put it all together and you're like, okay, I feel really comfortable moving him to the number one line.
Yeah, there's a really high floor with him, right?
Yeah.
We like what we see from him from a development perspective. He's been able to show that he's able to throw into advanced coverages, right?
Mhm.
He's got all the physical tools you're looking for. He's the size of Drake May right now. He's got a really big arm. He's able to put touch on his passes. He's got really good footwork and mechanics, and he's got a lot of room to improve still, right?
Right.
That's one of the big things there. I'm looking forward to seeing how he does this season. He doesn't play the best competition, but
Right.
I expect he'll still put up major numbers like we hope he will, and continue to improve from here on out. There's been plenty of coverage of Tavian Sinclair's move to number one on Rivals.com. Please go check all of that out. Another new 5-star in the Midwest, though, Trey McNutt, one of the safeties, 5-star safeties, is just a really impressive player. 5'11", nearly 6 foot, about 185 pounds, 9.5-inch hands, a wingspan of 6'4", almost 6'5". And not this spring, but last spring, he was clocked at a 10.82 in the 100 and a 21.7 in the 200 meters. So a big safety who can really cover a lot of ground, and it's just a really solid prospect. I think he's got this competitive edge to him on the field that helps him stand out as well. What really stood out to you, though, when you looked at McNutt as a potential 5-star?
Yeah, he's a really twitchy athlete that can cover a lot of ground. I think that the thing about him is that it's different is we've seen a lot here recently over the last few years, this like kind of, I don't know, infatuation maybe with these bigger safeties, that are 6'3" and above, that seem like they're these big rangy athletes, but really are kind of more so these hybrid, like kind of linebacker safety types, right? McNutt is not that. He's the exact opposite of that. He's more of a, I think at this point, it's now old school center field type safety. That you stick back in the deep third and you let him kind of roam and cover ground, and he can pick passes off. He's got good ball skills. We've seen him, down at OT7, I believe, playing really well down there. He made a name for himself at some different workouts as well. Down in Houston, our team has been able to see him. I'm curious to see with him. We talked about St. Clair kind of moving forward during his senior year. I'm interested to see McNutt's senior year as well, because this is going to be a time where now all of that spotlight and attention that I do think that, as a defensive back, he's okay with, right? And I think that that's kind of, safe to say he's fine with that spotlight, but having that on you and now being a newly minted 5-star and going through this process, I'm real curious on how he handles that on a week-to-week basis. But on the field, I think he's a fantastic player, and he's heading off to Oregon, is where he's committed to right now. A&M still battling there, but Oregon's getting a really good player out of the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, he'll have a chance to play early there, play
Yep.
often, and make a real impact in the Big Ten now, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, there were a bunch of other big moves in the Midwest as well. Ryan Montgomery, Georgia quarterback commit, makes a big move. Damian Shanklin, LSU commit. Now Tennessee commit, Deshaun Bram, and Penn State commit, Jaden Woods, all made big moves in the Rivals 250 or are new entrants into the Rivals 250. So when you look at these guys, what really stood out about them? I mean, I loved Bram when we saw him
Yeah.
at 5-star in Jacksonville, but I'll give you the floor here. I'll start with Montgomery. What really stood out to you about him?
Yeah, I think the thing about Montgomery is that he keeps getting better as well, and I think he ends up being a forgotten man. And it's a really unique situation, as you have a kid who is from a football family. His brothers played at Ohio State. He's going to be he's a future quarterback at Georgia. He's a Georgia quarterback commit, and yet he somehow has gone under the radar when it comes to his recruitment. You will never see that. It's just a unique situation. But Ryan is a really nice player. he throws a really accurate ball. Like he is a pinpoint accurate passer. And he's also a kid that's very coachable. It is a cerebral guy. I think when you talk to him, you really get that vibe from him as well. So George is getting a guy. When I say that, he will fit perfectly into what Kirby Smart's got going on down there. We'll just be able to distribute the ball nicely. And then you talk about Damian Shanklin, the pass rusher out of Indianapolis. He's a player too that was really productive during his junior year. A good player off of the edge. He has a really quick first step, plays well with his hands. I'd like to continue to see him get better in run support as he goes along, because he's definitely going to have to do that in the SEC. But he's a really nice player. The other guy we mentioned, Deshaun Brame, who I think that everyone loved when they got a chance to see him down at 5-star. And I think I've seen him 2 or 3 times this offseason. And every time you see him, he is definitely, as a tight end, he is on the all get off the bus team. Like, you want him coming off of the bus first for you. He's all of 6'5", 6'6", 230 pounds, but he does not move like he's that size, right? Like, we've seen him, he moves very well. He's got a big wingspan, big hands, makes him a quarterback's best friend out there. And he flipped during the time of all of this happening from Oregon to Tennessee in that class that they've been building down there in the quarterback room that they've been building. So I think he'll be a really nice fit down there, somebody that can stretch the field for him.
Yeah, and then Jaden Woods making a move, it seems like, from defensive end to linebacker during the high school season. We'll see how things turn out at the college level, but really interested to see how he progresses physically and what that means for his position at the next level. But you mentioned Shanklin, too, on the defensive side of the ball. Really excited to see him as a pass rusher and how his game progresses. Ryan Montgomery's overall arm strength has, I think, really been a catalyst for his improvement. We saw him at Elite 11 this summer, and that ball jumps off of his hand now more so than it ever has. Accuracy was never an issue with him. I think he completed about 69% of his passes last year. Good enough size, really smart, cerebral quarterback. Like you mentioned, mechanically very sound, pretty good footwork as well. And consistent accuracy is the name of his game. We're going to see a lot more of that, I think, this season. Deshaun Brame, number 3 tight end in the nation, I believe. It's hard to do much better than that, especially looking at the 2 guys who are ahead of him in the rankings there. But Tennessee's getting a really good one. He might be the best tight end that Tennessee's ever signed when all is said and done there. So keep an eye on all of these guys as the fall season rolls around here. Greg, thanks so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Please make sure you catch all of Greg's content on Rivals.com and give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks so much, Greg. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, man.
I'm joined now by national recruiting analyst Sam Spiegelman to go over the many big rankings moves across the Southeast. But I really do want to start the first one really with a guy from the Midwest. LSU commit Bryce Underwood committed to LSU, the number 2 player in the entire country. You and I have seen Bryce Underwood just as much, if not more, than the rest of the national analyst team here at Rivals. Moving Bryce from 3 to 2 in the Rivals 250, what went into your thought process when we were figuring out, hey, we need to move Bryce up a spot?
My thought was whether he should be number 1 or number 2, because I don't think that there's a question after seeing both Tavian St. Clair and then Bryce Underwood in a couple weeks of each other that those are 2 of the, if not the best quarterbacks in the country, 2 of the best players overall in the country. Seeing Bryce at Friday Night Lights at LSU this summer, I was in awe seeing him. He's physically off the chains of what his athleticism level is. He's doing backflips all over the field, and he's making these throws on a rope during 7-on-7 in the camp portion. He's throwing to his future teammates Harlem Berry and JT Lindsay and Jabari Mack. Obviously, these are high level guys, but he's putting the ball exactly where you'd expect them to be. He's beating great coverage. He's kind of anticipating his throws, doing everything you want to see in a camp setting. And then what really sold me was seeing him in the live 7-on-7 part. He's zipping into tight windows. He's reading and he's reacting, and he's putting balls where only his receivers can get it. And he's throwing 90-mile-per-hour fastballs and doing so. I think he processes at a really high level, and he's got the arm talent to make every throw in the book and then some. And I think he's very advanced for his age. And I think this senior season, him and Tavian, we're going to be having the same conversation in November and December one of these guys has to be number one of them has to be number two, but they're both just elite, extreme high level quarterbacks.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought process after seeing him at the New Jersey Under Armour camp, and then seeing everything that came out of his the rest of his offseason, OT7 and the LSU camp. I think you said it was Friday Night Lights there. So one of the best athletes we've had at quarterback in some time, I think, right? Him and Keelan Russell, probably the two best athletes at quarterback in this class. Really like his arm strength, really like his ability to put the ball in certain places and make it just kind of only where his receivers can get it. He the performance in the 7-on-7 setting holds a lot of weight with me because he doesn't play much good competition during the season, right? So that's really the only thing we have to judge him against when he's going against elite competition. OT7 and what he did at the LSU camp, I think carries a lot of weight there. Being able to see that he has the ability to move through a progression, read defenses, and then still fire the ball accurately to his receiver through tight windows, being able to put touch on passes. At the New Jersey Under Armour camp, it was pouring down rain and he was still on the money with his throws. Now, mechanically, there are some issues, footwork, there are some issues, but it shouldn't be too difficult for him to iron those things out when he gets to the next level. I'm not so worried about that. I am, though still a little bit concerned about his learning curve when it comes to facing great competition day after day after day. He's going to get it in practice at LSU, and then that LSU schedule during the season is no joke in the SEC. So we'll have to see how things progress there. Like you said, though, it is going to be a battle for number one in the Rivals 250 from now until when it is final in January. Him, Tavian St. Clair, Juju Lewis is still up there at quarterback. We've got David Sanders, the best non-quarterback in the class, is there. And then we'll keep an eye out for Keelan Russell. I think he could be in for another big move in the rankings after what I expect to be a pretty awesome season for him too. But going back to these guys in the Southeast, we mentioned Juju. He's at number, I think, 5 right now, or 4 in the rankings, 5 in the rankings, excuse me. And then other new guys from the Southeast in the Rivals 250. The biggest mover and the biggest jump in the Rivals 250 this time came from Clemson linebacker commit Logan Anderson. Got a really good look at him at Rivals 5-star at the end of June. Sam, this was, I think, your first time seeing him as well in June. So what did you see from Logan that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, Logan Anderson probably had the best offseason of any 2025 prospect in the country. He's making the transition from playing some running back and some safety as an underclassman, and this spring moved to linebacker and took it and ran. That same straight level speed from the safety position from linebacker translates so naturally, and we saw that on tape. And then this offseason running sub 4.5s at Georgia, at Clemson, at Ole Miss, at Auburn. Everyone in the SEC in the Southeast came offering for Logan. And when we got to see him at 5-star, all those physical traits, they really lined up from what we saw on tape. About 6'2", 215, 220 pounds, but moves extremely well. He moves like a safety, and he's going to continue to add weight to his frame, maintain that speed and that outstanding play recognition and instinct that you love to see from your safeties and your outside linebackers. And we saw him in coverage, Adam. We didn't get to see that he can play really well in space, that he can play and cover the run really well. I think the future is very bright for Logan Anderson, one of the biggest risers in the country, and someone who still is just getting used to a whole new position going into his senior year.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, there's so much to like about Logan Anderson's athletic profile. I'm going to read this to you because I don't want to get it wrong. 6'2", 32-inch arms, 78-inch wingspan. There have only been 20 linebackers picked in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft since 2018 with those measurables, and 8 of them were picked in the first round. Okay, so Logan Anderson, elite physical traits there. And then when you look at the film, I mean, he can run for days. I mean, he put up an obnoxious stat line this season: 2,800 yards rushing, 45 touchdowns on the ground, just as a running back. Those skills as a running back do translate to linebacker position. He can see running lanes. He understands how to get downhill quickly. He's an aggressive guy. And what we saw in coverage at 5-star was also very impressive. He has those skills to be able to move and cover in space, and just getting used to more knocking down passes, getting and throwing lanes is where the learning curve will come. But a really impressive offseason for him, like you mentioned. I don't think anybody had a better offseason than him. I want to also touch on Isaiah Gibson, the big time defensive end out of Georgia commit, right? He's continues to move up the rankings. Also one of the biggest risers in this rankings update. Elite physical traits again for him. But when you look at Isaiah Gibson, what stands out for you?
How well he moves in that frame. 6'5", 270 pounds. Some saying maybe closer to 280, but he's starting his senior season at Warner Robins. We'll say he's right around 270, but a big, massive defensive end, can also probably line up on the inside, but can win with speed, can win with power. He can move guys off the ball with ease. Elite physical gifts paired with the athleticism. He's bouncy for that position. We've seen guys go to Georgia with these kind of skill set and just take it to a whole new level when they get in that strength plan. So he's someone that has continued to add weight and not lose any of that speed off the edge, that power to move guys off the ball. So it can be a fantastic run defender as well as pass rusher. So doesn't have to come off the field on first through third downs. Just someone who just impacts the game at a high level. Wreaks terror around the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned the measurables. I'm going to read off a couple of them to you here. 7-foot wingspan, 36-inch arms, 4.7 40 he's been timed with. I mean, very, very few prospects, not just defensive linemen, prospects at that size who can move like he does. So really impressive player there. Aggressive, good hand techniques, explosive. He's position versatile across the defensive line. An outstanding prospect for him right there. I don't think he's done moving up the rankings either. We're going to get another look at him this season and see if another big move needs to be made there. A bunch of really good defensive backs and receivers also moved up in this rankings update from across the Southeast there. Shamar Arnaud, Samuel Turner, Jarrell Boulder, Malik Clark, Jadam Blair, just to name a few of them there. Laganza Hayward also. Any of these guys really stood out to you during this offseason? It's like, hey, these guys are just no-brainer Rivals 250 prospects.
A lot of those guys that you mentioned from the Carolinas, Malik Clark tested sub 4.4 at the Under Armour Charlotte camp, has been, one of the more productive receivers in South Carolina, combination of size, speed, and obviously production as an underclassman. I just thought he was someone that, how do you not account for this speed that he continues to get faster and with that size? Just everything you want to see in kind of a number one, number two kind of blend receiver. Jarrell Boulder, again, another really strong offseason, has a huge frame and obviously adjusts to the football at a really high clip. Can see him make plays at multiple levels of the field, in the middle of the field, on the perimeter. That position versatility with the outstanding skill set as a pass catcher, hard to ignore. And then Jadam Blair, also Notre Dame commit, size, position versatility, one of the more impressive tapes of any safety in the country. You see he's able to defend from multiple positions, can be that center fielder, but also be that difference maker as a nickel. That hybrid mentality, as well as his ability to defend and get after the run and make plays by and near the line of scrimmage, I think screams volumes for getting him into the 250 and seeing what a lot of those guys do as seniors.
Yeah, I like all those guys. Very familiar with those guys from the Carolinas. Receiver Sam Turner was somebody who flashed for me early this offseason. I think it was back in February. I saw him at a 7-on-7 tournament, and just such a smooth receiver, really good in and out of his routes. Outstanding hands, good size, maybe not a blazer, but there's a really, really high floor for him. And then Shamar Arnaud had an outstanding offseason as well. Rivals camp in Atlanta, then Rivals 5-star event, the USC commit, just really, really good in coverage, stays in phase with receivers, great measurables, right? Long arms, does a good job making plays on the ball. I think there's a lot of potential there as long as he stays focused. And, he does have some position versatility too, can play corner, could play safety. He does have that size and just those instincts as well, I think come pretty naturally to him. Before I get you out of here, I want to talk about one more big time defensive lineman. Malik Autry has been a steady riser in the rankings. He's flirting with a few schools. I believe he's still committed to Auburn, right? So what did you see out of Autry this offseason that kind of keeps pushing him up the rankings?
Well, obviously he's one of those first off the bus kind of players as a high 4-star defensive tackle, about 6'4", 300 pounds. But, what impressed me was seeing him at the Rivals 5-star, seeing he can provide that pass rush from an interior defensive line position, despite that massive frame where, he can occupy blockers and 2, 3 at a time and cause havoc, collapsing the pocket in there. We saw him show his nifty side. He's very twitchy from the inside, has great hands, moves extraordinarily well for 300 plus pounds. I think plus, plus, plus in all of those categories. So if you can play the run at that level, if you can provide some, if not a really high level pass rush from the interior, which he's continuing to develop and expand his game in that area, I think he deserved for that big rankings bump to continue to rise. And again, watching him at Apalika going into his senior season, he could have a dominant senior season at that premium position with that wide range of premium pass rush tools and again, playing the run. Someone that can continue to ascend up the rankings.
Yeah, I agree with you there. He's got the size of a run stopping interior defensive lineman, but he has the physical tools and the speed, honestly, of a pass rushing interior defensive lineman. 6'5", well over 300 pounds, closer to 320 or so. He did trim down a little bit as the off season progressed, but almost an 80-inch wingspan, 35-inch arms or so. Sub 5 shuttle, 5'10" shuttle, which is really impressive for a guy that size. That's where the quickness really shines, really stands out there. So continuing to see some impressive things from Autry as the offseason progresses. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure you guys give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can find all of his content on rivals.com. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
I'm now joined by national recruiting analyst John Garcia Jr. John, 4 new 5-stars from the state of Florida. That is where you are based. These are your guys. I want to start with the one that we had been alluding to for a long time, Javian Hilson, a guy who was just on the border of earning its 5th star at the end of the last rankings update. Now earns that 5th star and this rankings update. What can you tell me about the Florida State defensive end commit that we didn't really already know before? Why is he now a 5-star prospect?
Yeah, I think we were always sky high on Javian. I mean, he came into the last update as the #1 weak side end in the country. So definitely always in that range. But I think what has started to separate him is he's not relying on his length and speed to be that only trait. It's probably still his strongest trait, but that's not all he's bringing to the table. And this offseason, we saw him build out his counter moves a little bit more, play with more power, and maybe most importantly, especially for FSU fans listening, carry more weight. He's over 240 pounds right now at 6'4" and change. And I think he still looks lean enough to where he can add on to that frame. So whether you're talking about where he is now or certainly where his game's going, I think he's done enough to get that benefit of the doubt.
I agree. I mean, premium position, right? Plays much stronger than he looks. Super productive, relentless on the field. Really good techniques as an edge rusher. Speed on the outside, counter moves to the inside. The physical traits are there. He's not overly long or overly tall, but he's right in kind of in that sweet spot, and he has plenty of upside still. So it's kind of us giving him his 5th star now, kind of a bet on the upside there with Hilson. Jamie French, a receiver who's one of the most popular in this class, finally lands in that 5-star range. What do you think about French's upside, though, as we look to the college level and beyond?
Yeah, I think the upside is the combination of his polish and again a frame that you're just sort of waiting to be expanded upon. He's always been taller and longer, but now we're seeing a little bit more physical prowess with his game, and that explosiveness is translated to, I think, more expanded route tree ability here. I think we sort of, or I did, sort of viewed him almost narrowly as a possession guy, a great route runner who's going to do the right things, catch the ball away from his body, and win those contested battles. But this past offseason, I think he's shown more 3rd level ability to where you, again, what more boxes do we need to check here with a guy like this? He's flashed dominance against fellow blue chip recruits, basically every single event or tournament or Rivals 5-star that we've thrown out at him. He's been extremely consistent, yet there's still some real physical room for him to grow and fill out and maybe even enhance some of those strengths a little bit more.
Yeah, I I classify all of that under just kind of maturing as a high-end prospect, right? He's really come into his own as a guy who understands how good he is, what he can do on certain routes, when he needs to be targeted, when he needs to alter his speeds, maybe speed up, slow down to create separation, and he can almost call his shot on how he's going to catch it or when he's going to get targeted, that kind of thing. So, really impressive guy who I think he's going to have a really solid a college career and then end up in the NFL if he stays healthy. Another 5-star out of the Florida area, originally from the Mid-Atlantic, Nathaniel Owusu Boateng. Owusu is one of the most explosive prospects, regardless of position in this class. Love his game. What have you seen from Owusu that really stands out to you?
Yeah, another one kind of like Hilson that was always on the verge, came in, number one outside linebacker in the class, I think several updates ago at this point. So it was a matter of just what's that final box for him to check. We've always loved the sideline to sideline ability. We knew he had that pass rusher trait as needed, but we didn't see it a whole lot. And I think this offseason granted a lot of that access for us. And I think what separates him in particular, in addition to looking like he's already a Saturday or Sunday guy, it's that competitive edge that he brings to the table. We saw at 5-star, he's working with linebackers and running backs, and he's just dominating every running back in the blocking drills. So he comes over to the big boys, and there were no 3-stars at this event, right? So he's going against the O-line MVP and trying to beat him as a defensive lineman, even though he doesn't really know what he's doing from that standpoint, but he still gained some ground, talked his what, and made a splash in the process. And I think that's exactly who he is. He knows the value of that linebacker position is changing. It's about what you can do on third down, and that pass rush element is starting to pop up more consistently with him. But he's always been able to run and cover, and it's usually the opposite for these linebackers. We're usually trying to figure out, hey, can this guy really run with a running back? Can he cover? Does he have instincts and awareness with the ball in the air? Those answers have been yes with Nate for a long time. So it's been the other side of it, in my opinion, in trying to figure out whether or not he is a legitimate 5-star. And again, he showed that this offseason.
Yeah, that tenacity, right? It just kind of jumps off the screen, off the field. You can see how quick twitch he is, how aggressive he is on the field. It was on full display at 5-star, and now he earns that 5th star. One stat I did want to point out about him: 6'2", the 3-cone time of 7.16, I think it was. And I pulled out a stat earlier in the day. He is one of I think there are only 11 linebackers who have been drafted since 2018 who are 6'2" with a 3-cone time like that. Almost all of them first rounders. 2 of them, Micah Parsons, Jack Campbell, pretty good company to be in at this level, right? Another 5-star, excuse me, from Florida, who we just elevated in this rankings update, Hilton Stubbs, a guy who's kind of been on this track for a while, one of the best safeties in this class, one of the best prospects in this class. I think he won the vertical competition at 5-star in June, and so now he's one of the elite prospects in the rankings as well. When you've seen Stubbs develop over the last few years, what stood out to you?
Yeah, I think at the beginning he was, kind of a big, long safety that was still figuring out where he was at in terms of body control. So he was, a big hitter and a guy who would flash a little bit here in the passing game. But as a junior, starts to fill out a little bit more, and he just looked comfortable back there. 6 picks last year, 2 in a playoff game that I saw, where it was pure coming off the hash and beating the receiver to the football right there on the sideline. I mean, just classic center fielder stuff. And then you see him in person, 6'1", 195, still
Thick, yeah.
extremely long, I think a 6'5" or 6'6" wingspan. And then he's winning the vertical competition. He just does things you don't expect. Winning the vert, I thought, was huge for him because he was going against some real, basically basketball players, guys who are AAU stars. And then down in Miami for the Rivals Camp Series stop in April, he goes out there and wins DB MVP, covering guys like Vernell Brown one-on-one. You just don't expect a bigger safety to run with your typical elite Floridian, this 5'10" shiftier guy who absolutely makes guys look stupid. There's none of that with Stubbs. So I think he comes in as maybe the most balanced safety in the class because he came up as kind of a bigger hitter, and he's turned into and transformed into this do it all, line them up wherever you need him kind of guy.
Yeah, definitely one of the more rangy safeties, bigger safeties though in this class. He didn't win all of his reps at 5-star, but you can see the skill set. You can see how impressive a tool he's going to be for a defensive coordinator at the next level. Somebody who can play in the box, cover in the slot, or play deep center. He's got those physical traits that you love for a safety who's can play physically, but also has those coverage skills. Those are the new 5-stars out of Florida: Hilson, French, Owusu Boateng, and Stubbs. But there were a lot of other big movers from the state of Florida. New IMG standout, Michael Carroll, one of those guys who, from my area in the Mid-Atlantic. He's from the Philadelphia area. Checks all the boxes there as an offensive lineman who, deserves to be ranked as one of the best in the nation. Jarquez Carter was one of the best defensive linemen at the Rivals 5-star in June. Zaire Addison continues his ascension up the rankings as well. He was outstanding at Miami Rivals camp and really all off season too. And, he put an exclamation point on his off season at the Rivals 5-star. Dallas Golden, Max Buchanan, Tremel Jones, London Merritt, Bryce Fitzgerald, all guys who moved up from the state of Florida. Plus, we got a few new guys into the Rivals 250 from the state of Florida: Grayson Littleton, Ty Jackson, and Tashawn Gelsey. I'm going to kind of give you the floor here, John. What of these guys really just kind of, I guess, shocked you with how well they performed this offseason and really deserved this big move up?
Yeah, I think Addison is one of the more interesting recruits in the entire cycle. A guy who is now a top 10 tackle on Rivals. And I would bet that every tackle ranked ahead of him and most ranked behind him don't have, or he has less reps playing the position than all of those guys. So every single time we see him, he looks a little bit more comfortable. That the physical traits jump off the page. Extremely long, extremely athletic. This is a former D lineman, former basketball player. I mean, he's running the 200-meter dash in track just because. I mean, this is a freaky athlete that is going to conform into this modern athletic tackle prospect. And every time we see him, he looks more of the part and he looks more comfortable going against true defensive linemen that are going to be early impact guys on Saturday. So he's one that I would imagine keeps having an opportunity to climb up the list. And then I think Grayson Littleton's one who is still probably under talked about. Clemson commitment out of Tampa, moved down from the Midwest, and I think he got like 40 offers in the spring once everyone saw how fast he was. So when you go down and see him in person, you're expecting a swift and quick corner and maybe the old school mold where you're looking at his great hips and change of direction. And Littleton has all of that in his bag. But in seeing him in person, especially at that OT7 event, he moved around a lot and really looked comfortable, deep at safety. He worked a ton of nickel, even did some nickel blitzing that looked extremely natural. And we know how valuable that could be at the next level. So I think instead of just, hey, speedy finesse corner, this is now a gadget guy that you could move around your secondary relative to the matchup you have on Saturday. So I think his value is one that another that's just sort of sky high, and we don't see it really going the other way.
Yeah, I love what you said about both of these guys. Addison's length really stands out. I think it was 84 inches, if I remember correctly. I mean, that's massive for an offensive lineman who isn't necessarily the tallest guy out there, but he has the tools to be a standout for sure. Jarquez Carter was an absolute monster at Rivals 5-star. Explosiveness, strength, hand techniques, playing with leverage, all of that. He's got it for sure. Bryce Fitzgerald is a guy who I think we're highest on him in the industry, and I really like his abilities, and he really just hasn't had a whole lot of physical development either. So when we see him at the college level really take advantage of the strength and conditioning program, I think he's a guy who's really going to shine at the college level more so than he has here at the high school level. Incredible athlete, really natural skills, and just raw for sure. And another guy I want to mention too is, as we get out of here, Ty Jackson, somebody who we really want to learn more about this season. Last season he was very, very good, earned his 4-star for sure, but was injured pretty much all off season. Nothing major, just kind of nagging injuries. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he is this season. I know you're going to get out there and take a close look at him, and I'll be dialing up those huddle films for sure, just to check out how it's going week to week for him. When you've seen I guess, John, when you've seen the film of Jackson, what I guess has stood out to you so far, and what are your major questions going into the season for him?
Yeah, well, he's extremely explosive, regardless of his size, which is probably the biggest question. I think he's hovering around 200 pounds. We don't know quite for sure how updated that might be, but he's got good length, 6', 6'1", but extremely explosive. So comfortable working downhill against the run. He set the tackle records at his high school the last 2 years. So he set the record, broke his own record. So a guy who can fill it up on downs 1 and 2. But again, what about third down? Well, that's really where the mystery lies. Not a lot of coverage reps on tape, not a lot of pass rushing reps on tape. And I think that could have some correlation to his size and length, which are sort of, relative unknowns in the industry at this point. So he's a guy we absolutely have to see up close on Friday nights, but there's no doubt. And the way he's getting recruited, signals that athletically, this is one of the plus guys in the cycle, in the country at the linebacker position. But I think finding that third down trait and truly locking in on a projection for him positionally are the two major questions still to be answered.
That's right. I agree with you wholeheartedly on each of those points. John, thank you so much for joining me here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Make sure you guys catch all of John's content on rivals.com, and please do give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram. He's about to head out to some games here this week, next week, as the season gets started there in Florida. Thanks very much, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by National Recruiting Director Adam Gorney here on the Rivals Rankings podcast. Now, Gorney, there was a really big discussion, frankly, about these quarterbacks at the top of the rankings. Tavian St. Clair came out on top, number 1 in the Rivals 250, followed by Bryce Underwood. Julian Lewis fell to number 5. Not really fell, just guys moved ahead of him. And then Keelan Russell came up to number 9. Outside of those 5 stars, it's Deuce Knight, Tramel Jones, Ryan Montgomery, KJ Lacey, Bryce Baker, Hussein Longstreet, Madden Iamaleava, and so on and so forth from there. But at the top of these rankings, there was a big discussion, like I mentioned there. What was your argument there for or against Tavian St. Clair?
Yeah, this is one of those years where you could really make an argument for any of the 4 or 5 stars to be number 1, and it would be valid. And then you can make an argument for one of the other ones, and it would make sense as well. So we had seen very little of Tavian St. Clair before this offseason. What was great about this offseason was the Rivals 5-star. He was able to come to that. We also liked that he was at the Elite 11, and he played a lot more 7-on-7. So we could see sort of chemistry, timing with receivers, throwing against elite players. He does not play elite competition in high school. So, it was one of those things where after seeing all these guys, we had seen Underwood a little bit, not as much as Lewis and Russell. We had to make a decision. So one of the options was to keep Juju Lewis number 1. That was discussed. One of the options was to make Bryce Underwood number 1. We had felt he could certainly end up number 1 after seeing him more. But by him dodging basically all of the big national events, we weren't really comfortable doing that with him. So we get to Tavian St. Clair and we say, look, he was outstanding at our event. He was outstanding at the Elite 11. He was very good in 7-on-7. He had a monster junior season, looks great. All of the things that you're kind of factor in there, plus just the off the field stuff. He's very mature. All of those kinds of factors just hanging around him at the Elite 11. And in Jacksonville, you could just tell that he kind of handles this very professionally. So at some point we need to make it that we could have argued it all day. At some point we need to make a decision. We went with the Ohio State commit.
Yeah, and it's not a final decision by any means, right? There are 2 more major rankings updates before the rankings are final. One after this season, and then another one in January after the All-Star games. So Tavian St. Clair's job isn't finished, right? If he's really focused on keeping that number 1 spot, the job isn't done. Bryce Underwood is hot on his heels, another Midwest, quarterback. Julian Lewis hasn't done anything to fall. It's just these other guys seem to have better projectable traits. And kudos to him for going out and competing more than any of these guys. He's been to more events than any of these other guys. We talked about this at length at Rivals 5-Star. We don't understand some of the negative feelings there about Julian Lewis that's out there. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you and me. But personally, in my mind, I think Keelan Russell has probably the highest ceiling of these guys right now. Just one of the two best athletes at quarterback in this class, plus measurables, right? Plus throwing ability, plus he's faced elite competition on a week-to-week basis over at Duncanville, something that Bryce Underwood cannot say he's done. And so I think he's a guy who to look for as a potential riser as this season goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone knows I'm a big Juju Lewis fan. I think he's sort of what like 21st century football has become. If he stays with the USC commitment, he's going to be playing for maybe the best quarterback head coach in the country, who has put numerous people number one in the draft, numerous Heisman Trophy winners, an offense that's very friendly to quarterbacks, and he'll be surrounded by skilled position players. So our rankings are not based off of where they go to college, but in terms of projection, I think Juju Lewis is in a very good position if he stays with USC. I think Underwood, from a physical perspective, is outstanding. I do find some quirks in his throwing mechanics, but the ball gets there. There's no questioning his ability, that's for sure. There is questioning him not showing up to anything. I think that's a little curious when everyone else is at all of the big events and not hiding. And we had to turn quarterbacks away from the Rivals 5-Star. We just didn't have enough room. So, there is something to watch there. And then, yes, Keelan Russell certainly, is 9 now, I believe, nationally. And that's something, too, that I've talked about this week on some other things is, the trend in the NFL draft is take quarterbacks early or not at all. So if you see 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 of our rankings, don't be surprised. It's because NFL teams are taking quarterbacks super early in the first round, or they're waiting probably into the second or third round to take those guys. So I think Keelan Russell is Jaden Daniels 2.0. I think he's further along technically and mechanically than Jaden Daniels was at the same stage. They basically weigh the same at the high school level. So if Keelan Russell ends up 6'3", 6'3.5", 6'4", 205, I wouldn't be shocked. And I wouldn't be shocked, just like Daniels was the second pick in the NFL draft, I wouldn't be shocked if he was a top 5 pick as well.
Yeah, I'm keeping a close eye on Jaden Daniels, being a Washington fan. Some of these other quarterbacks I did want to highlight because they did have really good off seasons too. Deuce Knight, it's hard to say a bad thing about him other than the fact that he's a lefty. I'm not a big fan of lefties, but really like his skill set for sure. He's come a long way over the last year and a half, mechanically and from an accuracy perspective as well. Tramel Jones is about as solid as they come, just not as physically ready as some of these other guys. Ryan Montgomery was a big riser for us in the rankings after seeing him at Elite 11, and Bryce Baker was also a pretty big riser along with Hussein Longstreet. Both of those guys did really good jobs at Elite 11 this offseason.
Yeah, Deuce Knight, I mean, in terms of like the throwing a beautiful ball, he might be number 1 in this class. Like he puts it on the money. And the question with him over the last year or so was consistency. Some days he would look phenomenal. Some days he would struggle putting it onto the receiver's hands. So I think this summer, whether it was at our event in Jacksonville, whether it was at the Elite 11, whether it's at numerous OT7 events or other 7-on-7s, another kid who shows up to everything and competes, and he looked phenomenal. I think Ryan Montgomery was maybe the surprise of Elite 11, just with how athletic he kind of plays the position. He's very smooth. Again, a very competitive kid, gets after it. Liked him a lot. Tramel Jones, like you said, super solid. And like nothing he does is going to like totally blow you away, but the ball gets exactly where it needs to be. It's thrown well, and it's not flashy. It's just all substance. I think Hussein Longstreet is another one who we should talk about. He was very good at Elite 11 and has been very solid this summer. He also plays in a high school offense where they're going to put up a ton of points So you have to see him. I'm going to see his team against Mater Dei to open the season next week. So that will be a big early test for him. But he's had a great summer. I just don't love how he dips the ball so low when he's throwing it. Other than that, there are no complaints in his game. And then, yes, Bryce Baker is another kid. Very good-looking kid, compact, big, strong kid. Should be able to do a lot in college. And so I think those are some of the names. And then Sagapolatelli, who has moved up to a 4-star ranking, is another kid who absolutely blew us away. A lefty, but blew us away. And shocked that, I think Cal got a really, really good one here. Shocked that his recruitment really didn't take off after that Elite 11 performance.
We'll see if there's any movement on the quarterback dominoes as National Signing Day gets a little bit closer here. Before we move on to some of these other big movers, I want to talk about some other potential 5-stars that are just outside of that 5-star range here in the new Rivals 250. Ty Haywood, Caleb Cunningham, Dijon Lee, Dallas Wilson, Nathaniel Marshall are the ones that immediately come to mind there. But there's like Khalik Lockett. There's a few other guys at skill positions that we are considering for a potential 5th star. Who really stands out to you as a guy who's just on the precipice of earning that 5th star?
Yeah, a lot of those names I think are ones to watch. Caleb Cunningham, I just wish we could see him at a national event. Watching tape, he's very impressive. I don't think he's totally technically sound. Beating up on kids in Ackerman, Mississippi doesn't really impress me all that much. Let's see him on a national level to see it. He had plenty of opportunities to show up places. He chose not to do those national events. So we'll have to see him in his senior year, get a real good feel for him. Hopefully he can do an all-star game. But I will tell you, I thought for a long time he was going to end up at Mississippi State, 30 minutes down the road. Auburn made a real heavy push for him. Alabama certainly got involved there. So they've liked him very, very much. We also definitely like him. He's right on that cusp. Dijon Lee is someone, if Devin Sanchez is a top 5, top 8 player in the country, Dijon Lee probably shouldn't be in the 30s. So they're very similar. They're both long, athletic, rangy defensive backs. I actually, for my podcast this week, talked to his coach, Chad Johnson, out here in Mission Viejo. He was in the long jump without ever doing track before and set like a state record. So the athleticism is there. So that's going to be one we're talking about. I do want to see more of Dallas Wilson. I do want to see more of Nathaniel Marshall. It's hard to find 6'5", 240-pound defensive ends that aren't at least considered for the first round. So I think that he'll be in the discussion. And then I think if you're going to look for another offensive tackle, we're pretty heavy there right now, unless we see a lot of movement. I think Michael Carroll is someone who is on the David Sanders path. And what I mean by that is 2 years ago, he was physically impressive, but maybe didn't have that toughness and confidence. Sanders certainly had that, and now Carroll had that. He was getting after it at the Rivals 5-star. He is definitely big enough, strong enough, plays mean, all those kinds of things we look for in an offensive tackle. So I think that's another name among many that we can look at.
Position versatility too with him. Plays guard, likes playing guard, but has a tackle build, has a tackle skill set as well. I'm with you on all these guys that we just talked about here. Very close to earning that 5th star. Nathaniel Marshall was somebody I thought we were going to see at Rivals 5-star. Didn't end up happening. I thought he probably could have earned his 5th star there based off of what I expected him to do on the field. But we'll have to wait and see how this season goes. I know our Midwest guy, Greg Smith, is going to be at a couple, if not at one, if not a couple of his games this season rather. You mentioned Jaron Sagapolatelli. I don't think I got the name right that time. As a big riser in the rankings from the West region. The biggest riser from the West region in this rankings update was receiver Jerome Miles, former Ole Miss commit, enters the Rivals 250 at number 98. An absolute blazer, right? He's a 10-3 track guy in the 100. He's 6'3", almost 220 pounds, which is, really impressive size for that kind of speed. When you look at Miles and you see what he's able to do on the high school level, how do you feel like that projects to the next level? And where do you think he's going to be most successful?
Yeah, he kind of has both. Now he hasn't been like on a national level a bunch, but I can tell you this, he's fast and he has like dog mentality when he plays the position. So he's also a tough kid with great hands, and he really wants to be good. He just has an attitude of like he's going to be really, really good wherever he goes. Now, I think Michigan probably has the edge right now. I thought Ole Miss was going to be a good spot for him, but he backed off that pledge. He got very interested in Michigan, but before he makes any decisions, he's going to visit Ohio State, Georgia, LSU. Now, Georgia hasn't been pumping out elite wide receivers, but if you talk about LSU and Ohio State, there might not be two better schools for receivers than those two spots. So I think it's sort of a 4-team race now. Some people are talking that he could stay home and play at Utah. They're going to win a whole lot of games, that's for sure. And that Texas A&M is still very, very involved. But he's gotten like a lot more laser focused on his recruitment. He wants to take those visits before making a decision. And if he stays healthy into his senior year, he plays at Corner Canyon, which I'm making this number up, but they average like 60 points a game. Like they throw it all the time. It's where Isaac Wilson played and put up those huge numbers. Helaman Kasuga is there now as their quarterback, so he's going to have a very capable person throwing him the ball. So expect a big senior season from him, and then I would say it's probably Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU.
Yeah, I mean, really impressive on film, given the obvious big rankings update there, or rankings move rather. Another guy I want to hit on from the West region, Josiah Sharma, moves up 66 spots to number 137 in the nation. Big defensive lineman, kind of a bully on the inside there. What's your impression of Sharma at this point in the process?
Yeah, when I invited him to the Rivals camp in Southern California, I had never seen him in person. And I saw that he was, well over 300 pounds. And I was sort of thinking just kind of this big guy up the middle that took up space. But he had very little bad weight. He's very mean and physical. And he just kind of puts his head down and gets after people. So he's definitely the gap shooting defensive tackle who could swallow up people and be very problematic up the middle. I think that's why, so many schools wanted him so early on. He had always said that he felt he needed to be in the SEC. So he had committed to Oregon early, obviously went up there and loved it and fell in love with everything there, relatively close to home from him being up in Northern California. But then he went to Texas, saw everything that they had. And again, he just had this draw to the SEC. So now he's in it. He's a big boy, like well over 300 pounds, very strong, not a lot of bad weight, and someone who should be a menace along that defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I really like what I've seen from him on film, and when you guys saw him in person, I mean, there were so many rave reviews from you guys that I thought he would have entered the Rivals 250 higher than what he did initially. So 137 seems like a good spot heading into his senior season. Out on the East Coast here, not a ton of big moves in this rankings update in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Brandon Finney, the Oregon defensive back commit, moves up 69 spots to number 165, and then Trent Wilson, the Oklahoma defensive line commit, who we saw at Rivals 5-star. I believe it was the only event he did this offseason, was outstanding. He moved up 46 spots up to number 84 in the entire country. Gorney, when you saw Trent Wilson and were able to kind of lay your eyes on this guy who I've been raving about for a while now, what really stood out to you?
Yeah, just the toughness and like the maturity and the no nonsense of everything he does. He's not out there to get social media clips and Instagram clips. He's out there to kind of kick ass and turn around and do it again and again and again. So that's what you need along the defensive line. That's especially what you need on the interior of the defensive line, and that's especially what you need in the SEC. So he's going to be one of those kids who battles every single time he's on the field. Every rep he gets, he's going to battle, and he's going to keep people honest into the third and fourth quarter. So definitely an impressive player.
Yeah, I really like what we saw from him. He was coming back from a minor knee injury that kept him out most of last season, and he's full go for sure
Yeah.
going into his senior season. He's a wrecking ball in the middle there. Brandon Finney, I did want to touch on him for just a minute. The Oregon defensive back commit from Maryland, McDonough High School out in Owings Mills, Maryland. A super athlete, 6'2" with a 6'5" wingspan, outstanding track athlete, projects more, I think, probably, and he'll end up, I think, as a safety, but he has cornerback traits right now from a footwork perspective. I do think he'll end up, though, as a safety. He can cover a ton of ground with that huge wingspan and with that great track speed. He's still not as physical as I'd like as a defensive back there, but he does have a versatile skill set that should allow him to play a number of roles in the secondary there out at Oregon. So, Adam, that does it for this edition of the Rivals Rankings podcast. I really appreciate you joining me here. That's Rankings Director. I'm Rankings Director Adam Friedman. That's Recruiting Director Adam Gorney. Please remember to follow the Rivals.com YouTube channel, and of course, follow all the Rivals social media accounts. And of course, you can find all of our content on Rivals.com. Thanks so much, Adam.
Okay.